at some level, we owe the dot-com bubble an apology. That we thought that was really stupid, the way people got sucked into believing that pets.com was. But at least the dot-com thing there was something genuinely new. You know, there was a new technology. There was exciting stuff. You could make a kind of argument that all the old rules no longer applied. But to get sucked into what was probably the biggest bubble in history over housing, which has been around for 5,000 years, and believe that somehow the old rules no longer apply to like buildings, is really pretty bad. The thing that made this okay, I saw, as did basically anybody who looked at the numbers, said that housing prices were way out of line, except that what always happens in these things is that people start coming up with rationalizations. There are all kinds of reasons why the old rules didn't apply. If you just looked at a chart of house prices relative to anything, workers' incomes, rents, any of the things you might want to use for comparison, they were completely out of line with any historical pattern, but people didn't believe in it. But those of us who did say, hey, there's a bubble here, thought it would be nasty when it burst. But at least I had no idea how nasty it would be, just how bad it would be when the housing bubble popped. And that brings you to the second development, which is what happened to our financial system. And really what this comes down to is, what is a bank? And we have an image of a bank, which is it's a big marble building with a line of tellers and takes deposits, and it's run by Jimmy Stewart and all this stuff. And we knew that banks like that in the bad old days were subject to bank runs, and we know that a cascading, falling dominoes wave of bank failures is what really made the Great Depression great. The stock market crash of '29 by itself wasn't such a bad thing, but the bank runs of '31, '32 are what turned it into the real disaster that it was. And so we fixed it. Banks have deposit insurance, they're regulated, they have to have a certain amount of capital, the owners have to put a fair amount of their own money in. So there's a whole bunch of safeguards. But those only apply to banks that are big marble buildings with lines of tellers, or more formally, they only apply to depository institutions. And in economic terms, a bank doesn't have to be, strictly speaking, a depository institution. In economic terms, a bank is anybody who borrows short and lends long. Anybody who tells people they have ready access to their money on short notice, but ties that money up in ways where if all of the people who think they have their ready access to their money tried to get it at the same time, you can't do it. So a bank can be, for all practical purposes, a bank can be a hedge fund that's doing a lot of short-term borrowing and buying mortgage-backed securities. A bank can be an auction rate securities arrangement by which the Metropolitan Museum pays for improvements to its galleries. It can be all kinds of things. This stuff there wasn't much of this stuff 30 years ago. 30 years ago, the actual banks, the popular image of a bank and the reality of banking were pretty much matched each other, but not so these days. These days we have what a lot of people call the shadow banking system or the parallel banking system, which is as big or bigger than the traditional banking system. So there's something like $10 trillion in the old-fashioned marble buildings, but there's another $10 trillion in this other stuff. And the other stuff is basically unregulated and basically has no safeguards and has no formal insurance. And it's like what banks, old-fashioned banks, were before the 1930s. It's just it's the Wild West. There were people who warned that this could be a problem, but they were, dismissed. Said, you just don't understand. The market will police this, and you may have noticed that yesterday, Alan Greenspan said, "Oops,"